All right, let's dive right into this explainer today. We're going to re-examine the Great Pyramid of Giza. But look, we aren't just going to look at it as some dusty ancient wonder. Instead, I want us to treat it like a 4,600-year-old cold case. Seriously, this is a massive, ancient mystery that people have honestly been getting completely wrong for centuries. We're going to dig into the hard evidence to figure out exactly who built it, when they built it, how they did it, and ultimately why. 6 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering weight in tons of the Great Pyramid. It's made up of an estimated 2.3 million individual stone blocks. I mean, for over 3,700 years, this was literally the tallest human-made structure on the entire planet, originally standing at about 146.6 meters high. Just imagine standing at the base of a 6 million-ton mountain of hand-carved rock. It naturally begs the ultimate question, right? How on earth did they pull this off? Section 1. Myths and Wild Theories. Okay, before we can get to the actual truth, we've got to look at how historical confusion allowed some incredibly wild myths to take root. When a structure is this old and the people who built it are long gone, human nature kicks in. We start to fill in the blanks. And for thousands of years, that historical void was filled with just baseless legends. Around 450 BC, you had the Greek historian Herodotus visiting Egypt claiming the pyramid was built by 100,000 oppressed slaves under a tyrant king. A few centuries later, Diodorus Siculus insisted the builders weren't even buried inside because they were terrified the angry workers would destroy their bodies. Fast forward to late antiquity, pilgrims like Egeria were totally convinced the pyramids were massive granaries built by the biblical figure Joseph to store corn. And then in the Middle Ages, Caliph al-Ma'mun is literally tunneling into the side of the structure, frantically searching for hidden treasure and ancient knowledge. The craziest part? None of them had the real story. You know what's really funny about this? It's just how specific these ancient rumors got. Classical Greek writers firmly believed that there were giant inscriptions on the outside of the pyramid detailing an itemized budget for the workers' food. I'm not kidding. They literally wrote down that the inscriptions told you exactly how much was spent on radishes, onions, and garlic for the laborers. It turns out Herodotus and Diodorus were most likely relying on local interpreters who either couldn't actually read the hieroglyphs anymore or, well, were just making things up to entertain the tourists. Moving on to Section 2, Finding the True Builder. So how do we finally transition from ancient rumors about garlic budgets to actual hard facts? Well, 1837 was an absolute game changer. Explorers managed to tunnel into these previously inaccessible relieving chambers, hidden way up above the main king's chamber. And what did they find in there? Graffiti. But not just any graffiti. This was left by the ancient workers themselves, painted in red ochre. One of the work gang names translates to, "The white crown of Khnum Khufus is powerful." They actually found the name of Pharaoh Khufu spelled out over a dozen times. This was direct, undeniable attribution to Khufu, placing the pyramids squarely in the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. But wait, the evidence actually gets even better. In 2013, archaeologists made a truly miraculous discovery at Wadi al-Jarf, which is an ancient harbor on the Red Sea. They found the Diary of Mirror. Guys, this is the ultimate smoking gun. We're talking about actual papyrus logbooks from 2600 BC written by a mid-level supervisor named Mir. The text explicitly details the daily logistics of transporting white limestone from the quarries of Tura directly to the Great Pyramid, which he actually calls Akhet Khufu, or Khufu's Horizon. It even goes so far as to name Khufu's half-brother and vizier, Ankaf, as the supervisor of the whole project. Boom. The cold case of who built it was officially closed. Section 3. Solving the age-old mystery. Okay, so with the who solved, let's look at exactly when the pyramid was built. Because for the longest time, estimates were just all over the map. To pinpoint the exact date, scientists had to cross-reference two completely different methods. First, you have historical chronology. This is where historians take ancient king lists, like the Turin or Abydos lists, and basically sum up the lengths of all the king's reigns to trace backward in time to Khufu. But to verify that, they needed hard science. And that brings us to radiocarbon dating. The Egyptians used a staggering 500,000 tons of mortar to bind the pyramid's outer layers. When they mixed this mortar, organic ash from their campfires accidentally got trapped inside. So modern scientists were actually able to extract that tiny bit of ash and carbon date it directly. But there was a catch, and it's a big one. When the radiocarbon dates came back, they were 100 to 300 years older than Khufu's historical timeline. So did the historians get it completely wrong? Well, no. It actually perfectly highlighted a fascinating archaeological quirk known as the old wood problem. See, this happens when the organic material you're testing is much older than the actual event you're trying to date. In a desert landscape like Egypt, wood was incredibly scarce. So the builders were burning centuries-old recycled wood. We're talking parts of old ships or ancient trees to make the huge fires needed to bake their mortar. Once scientists accounted for this offset, the hard science and the historical records aligned perfectly right around 2600 BC.
Section 4. The reality of construction.
Knowing Khufu built it around 2600 BC, let's dive into the staggering reality of how they actually did it. This is where the engineering just gets mind-blowing. First things first, we absolutely have to bust the biggest myth of all, the one perpetuated by ancient Greeks and modern Hollywood movies, the whole idea of slaves, whips, and misery. It's completely false. The archaeological reality is that the pyramid was built by a highly organized, well-fed workforce of conscripted citizens. In fact, discoveries at the nearby workers' camps reveal they ate prime cuts of meat and were grouped into these really proud, competitive teams. It was a massive national project, a form of civic duty or civil conscription, not brutal slave labor. The real secret ingredient here? Absolutely brilliant organization. The logistical mastery of the ancient Egyptians was just off the charts. Workers were organized into specific gangs called zao, which consisted of about 40 men. Those were then further subdivided into tight-knit teams of 10. Think about it. To cut, move, and place roughly 250 massive blocks every single day, you don't need millions of chaotic people. A modern construction management study actually estimated they only needed an average workforce of about 13,200 people, peaking at maybe 40,000, to complete the entire thing in roughly 27 years. And this perfectly reveals the sheer mind-boggling scale of their supply chain. While the vast bulk of the pyramid, the 5.5 million tons of limestone core, was quarried right there locally on the Giza Plateau, the smooth white casing stone came all the way from Tura, floated across the Nile on boats, exactly like Mir recorded in his diary. But honestly, the most incredible part, the 8,000 tons of granite. These were massive, solid slabs, some weighing up to 80 tons each, used for the inner king's chamber. They were quarried in Aswan and transported over 900 kilometers down the Nile, just an unbelievable feat of transport.
Section 5. The true purpose.
Finally, we reach the resolution of our case. We know the who, the when, and the how. Now we have to answer the ultimate question. Why? Why go through all this effort to erect a 6 million ton structure in the first place? To answer that, we have to turn to the words of the ancient Egyptians themselves. There's this highly authentic quote from the Instruction of Harjadadef, who, by the way, was actually the son of Khufu. He wrote, "The house of the dead, the tomb, is for life." This beautifully, simply reminds us that the Great Pyramid was never a granary, it was never a treasure vault, and it wasn't just some geographical marker. It was a highly sacred vessel. In ancient Egypt, the king's transition to the afterlife was absolutely critical to maintaining cosmic order. The pyramid was a monumental tomb meticulously designed to keep the pharaoh's body safe and guarantee his, and by extension all of Egypt's, eternal place in the afterlife. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about something. For thousands of years, some of the smartest people in the world looked at the Great Pyramid and just made up stories about secret underground lakes, curses, and vegetable budgets. But when we finally rolled up our sleeves and looked at the hard evidence, the ancient graffiti hidden in the dark, the forgotten papyrus logbooks in a desert harbor, the microscopic bits of ash trapped in mortar, the real truth turned out to be a story of incredible human engineering and breathtaking organization. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What other ancient mysteries are out there, just waiting to be solved by looking at the facts? What other historical legends are ready to be completely rewritten by science? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and remember to always keep questioning the past.